Why is this couple smiling? Perhaps they found hope, meaning, and purpose in the book of Revelation. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a lonely man on a distant island received a remarkable vision. Some readers have been frightened by his vision, but many more have found in it the hope, meaning, and purpose they were looking for. And now, here are your hosts, Dr. John Pauline and Dr. Graham Bradford.
Hi, I'm John.
And I'm Graham.
And I want to welcome you to Revelation, Hope, Meaning, Purpose. Graham, we've been talking about the 7 trumpets.
Yeah.
And how does that work in with what we're going to talk about today?
A bit of light is going to come through, John.
All right.
Up till now, there's been a bit of gloom and doom, hasn't there? You know,
I think we did our best to put some light on it, but...
there's a lot of darkness there with
Yeah.
demonic activity and the 5th and 6th trumpets and the lack of the gospel and the human reason, rationalism, demonic activity, as it were, eclipsing and taking away the gospel light from the world.
Young girls getting sick and going home, things like that.
Scaring
when
kids.
they read the story.
Scaring kids. But through it all, the good news is the gospel is still being preached.
Yes.
And there's still hope, there's still intercession. And that was a very powerful factor, wasn't it, really? And really, going into this chiasm you mentioned earlier, the structure of the book, how the main idea is found in the center of the book. If you want to know the main thrust of Revelation, you go to the center. And at each end, we're matching as we go into the chiasm.
That's right.
And so we've looked at the trumpets heading in towards this great issue over worship at the end of time. And these trumpets really are matched by the plagues the other side of the chiasm.
Right.
And they both sort of parallel each other, as you said. And as we're doing this, we can learn from each other, as it were, both sides of the chiasm. But the plagues or bowls, the other side, are called last because the trumpet judgments came first. And these are the last. And when they come, of course, we'll see that the door is gone. So it's not all doom and gloom. We're going to look now at what is happening to the gospel being preached and those who are preaching it. So here's some good light and good news.
I guess the exciting part of it is we're getting closer and closer to the center. And in this book, that's where the action is. That's where the heart of the thing is.
The heart of the whole thing, yeah.
I think chapter 10 here, in a way, prepares the way for that center.
Sure.
It provides a certain timeline, in a way, to put the rest in.
Yeah, the privilege of preaching the good news about Jesus, and it's also talking about the consequences people will face as you preach it, because there are consequences if you tell people the good news. And I guess, John, you'd have to say it's a sad reflection on human nature. That not everybody wants to hear the good news.
That's true.
And some people get upset, and some people try to stop its proclamation. And you say, why? Well, we'll look at it as we go through. Why would people want to stop good news? Well,
that's right.
It happens.
Well, so the 7 trumpets, they work their way through chapters 8 and 9, and now we come to chapter 10. And so the question arises, how does chapter 10 fit in with the other trumpets? The 6th trumpet in chapter 9 was this horrible picture, but now is a very different kind of scene. So I think if we want to understand how this part is connected to the rest of the trumpets, it's helpful for us to look at several verses. And the first of these is Revelation 8:13, a verse that we haven't highlighted so far in this series of programs. Revelation 8:13 says, "As I watched, I heard an eagle that was flying in midair call out in a loud voice, 'Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the trumpet blasts about to be sounded by the other 3 angels.'" I'd like to hold this on the screen just for a moment, because it says, "Woe to the inhabitants of the earth." That's a term that picks up on chapter 6, where the souls under the altar were suffering from the inhabitants of the earth. And it says that the inhabitants of the earth should be afraid because of the trumpet blasts about to be sounded by the other 3 angels. So there's 3 woes here that are to be poured out upon the inhabitants of the earth, those who have persecuted God's people in the 5th seal. Now is the time of judgment for them. And these 3 woes are coming, and they're connected with the trumpets that are about to be sounded. Now connect that with chapter 9, verse 12. It's a very interesting picture. After the 5th trumpet is sounded, it says, the first woe is past, 2 other woes are yet to come. That tells us that the 3 woes correspond to the 5th, 6th, and 7th trumpets. So what we're seeing in 8:13 is saying the trumpets themselves are the response of God to the cries of the saints back in chapter 6. This is the fulfillment. Now, how does chapter 10 fit into all this? We find that in chapter 11, verse 14. There, it tells us the second woe has passed. The third woe is coming soon. 11:14 is at the end of this interlude of chapters 10 and chapters 11.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's at the end of the interlude.
Yeah.
You would think if the trumpets are just woeful events, that 11:14 would have been at the end of chapter 9. You cap those events, then 10 and 11 are just an interlude floating in space. That's not the case. In reality, chapters 10 and 11 are part of the 6th trumpet. They are the counterpart to the darkness in the 5th and 6th trumpet. They're the counterpart of these forces of evil, these demonic forces. Here we see the action of God counteracting these demonic forces. That's what chapters 10 and 11, I think, are all about.
Okay,
it's the same event coming from 2 different perspectives.
Right.
In a real sense, I think this is moving us into the last period of Earth's history. And I think we can spell that out in more detail in a later segment of this program.
Sure, okay. All right, so in this, what we would call section, we're dealing with what the church is called to do, what the followers of Jesus are called to do during this time, and the experience that they'll actually follow during this time. And, you know, there are some sweet and bitter experiences when people preach the gospel. It's good news, and you go out there and you preach and you teach and you think, hey, people are going to welcome this. But no, not always the case. No.
We should probably note again that this is not the first such interlude. We also saw a similar interlude in chapter 7. You had the seals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seals.
That's right.
Then you had the interlude of chapter 7, which is answering the question of the 6th seal.
Yeah.
So it's very clear that chapter 7 is part of the 6th seal.
Yeah.
It's not just floating in space.
Yeah.
It's directly related. It's giving the counterpart to the wicked disasters of chapter 6.
Yeah.
And here you go, you see the counterpart there. Similarly, here, it works as a counterpart. So I think you can draw some connections between chapter 10 and chapter 7.
Okay.
Chapter 7 shows us the end time army of God. And
Right, proclaiming the gospel.
Yeah, proclaiming the gospel.
Right.
Chapter 10 does the same thing, but does it in different images.
Isn't it fascinating how John sort of leads you up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you're saying now, where's the 7th?
Right, right.
Both
right.
for the seals, and then you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trumpets, and you say, now where's the 7th trumpet? And you wait, and he does it both times. So.
And on both occasions, when the 7th comes, it's almost an anticlimax.
It's a great pronunciation made of the kingdoms of this world, and
But it underlines another point that we've made from time to time. People get confused by Revelation when they try to overplay some of the details and try to make every little detail connect to something different, and you get this mass of things, you don't know how to put it together. The reality is, in fact, the book of Revelation is a little simpler than some people have made it. In actual fact, the book of Revelation covers the same ground from different angles, different aspects. You have the people of God at the end in chapter 7. You have it again in chapters 10 and 11. You have it again in chapter 14.
It's good teaching though, John, when you think of it, because a good teacher, they tell you what they're going to tell you, then they tell you, then they tell you what they've told you.
That's right, that's right.
And I guess the repetition that John gives us, looking from this perspective, coming from that angle, he mentions different symbols or images to picture those who are faithful to God and those who are on the baddies on the other side. But the fact that there's repetition all the time, when it comes together, it's almost like a mosaic, and you say, okay, I can see now how it fits in. If you keep the big picture.
And so as we said last time, we notice that while you have this connection between chapter 10 and chapter 7, you also have a connection between the 6th trumpet and the 6th bowl plague. You see, with the Armageddon, the Euphrates, and all these things. So the wicked army of the sixth trumpet is also the wicked army of the sixth plague, which is the Battle of Armageddon.
Yeah.
So there's a connection there on the side of the evil forces, just like you have a connection in 10 and 7 between each other on the side of the forces of God.
Yeah. What I like is because of the repetition, because of the going over the main points, there are certain points, although we may not be always dogmatic on smaller details, yet the big ideas are so strong and so clear.
Yes, so there are things in Revelation that we can say with confidence, even though there may be many things that neither of us understands totally.
Sure.
Before we go to a break, I'd like to call up on the screen a brief outline of Chapter 10, which we'll be talking about throughout this program. Chapter 10 is in two main parts. First of all, verses 1 through 7, you have a vision of the angel and the little scroll. And then following that, in verses 8 to 11, you have John receiving a sour experience and a new commission. And perhaps during the break, folk might want to take out Revelation chapter 10 and take a quick look at that passage and see those for themselves. It's not a difficult passage to read in a short piece of time.
Right. The good news is that God has a message to be preached to counteract the work of demonic forces in the fifth and sixth trumpets, and the light of the gospel is going to go out and shine to all the world. And so there's some good news coming up, John, isn't there? There is.
Right.
There certainly is. So let's just go to our break. Welcome back. We're now going to read Revelation chapter 10, commencing here at verse 1, and it says here, "Then I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven. He was robed in a cloud with a rainbow above his head. His face was like the sun, his legs were like fiery pillars. He was holding a little scroll which lay open in his right hand." And perhaps we could just have that image up, because this image shows us that this angel, he has a scroll in his hand, a little scroll.
Boy, that's little.
It is little. And there's very good reason for connecting this scroll with the scroll of Revelation chapter 5. John says, "I saw another mighty angel." You say, where did we have a mighty angel mentioned before? Well, chapter 5, where there is a mighty angel. And the Lamb has been unsealing the book. And now we've had this interlude now happening between, at this time, the Lamb has been unfolding it, but now the most logical thing is I think this book is now open. Probably not just this book the Lamb has been opening, but maybe there's something else more there, John. Yeah, maybe there's something else more. So scholars over the years have been confused a little bit by the word scroll, big scroll, little scroll, and they never sort of made a connection with chapter 5 until recent times. But now we know in the days of John, the concept of the idea of big scroll, little scroll can be used interchangeably. So that's opened up a door of understanding for us, which we probably never had before. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
In fact, the word for scroll in chapter 5 can also be somewhat diminutive as well, depending on how you use the language. Yeah.
Okay. So now this scroll is open, and we're going to see what happens now, the contents and the consequences of this scroll. Yeah.
An interesting piece here is that this is an open scroll, but the scroll of chapter 5 was closed. It was sealed. There's another scroll in the Old Testament that was closed or sealed, and that's the one in Daniel 12.
And the only book that was ever said to be sealed.
Yeah. So in Daniel 12, you have a sealing up of that book. In Revelation 5, there's a sealed scroll, but now the scroll is open. So there may be a hint here of Revelation 5, but also a hint of Daniel 12.
And John can do this. Sometimes he can have two things in his mind at the same time. Yeah, he can do that. Yeah.
But I suspect that as we go into chapter 10, we're going to see a deeper and deeper connection with Daniel 12, and that may well bring us to see some things that we wouldn't otherwise see in this text.
I agree. Yeah. Well said. Yeah, sure.
Now, when we get to verses 3 and 4, we come to perhaps the greatest mystery in the entire book of Revelation.
This worries me.
Oh, no.
Well, you're tempted to guess, but I'll listen to you anyway.
Yeah? You will? Okay.
Yeah, why did he even write it when he... No, I'll wait and hear what you have to say.
You think I can't convince you?
I'll see. I'll wait.
Revelation 10, verses 3 and 4. And he gave a loud shout like a roar of a lion. When he shouted, the voices of the seven thunders spoke. Okay, we've had the seven seals, well, the seven letters, the seven seals, the seven trumpets, and now the seven thunders. And when the seven thunders spoke, I was about to write. You know, John is almost like, okay, now we've got another series. But I heard a voice from heaven say, seal up what the seven thunders have said and do not write it down.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Well,
Okay.
why does he want to even tell us? I mean, why not just pass on?
This has become the favorite text of anybody who likes to go after great mysteries, I think. It's true. In fact, I met a lady about 30 years ago. She had a 300-page book on the seven thunders. Always wanted me to see it, but I tried to avoid her as much as I could because I was pretty sure that it was more about her than it was about the text. Here we see the text plainly says, this is not for you to write down. John may have understood what the seven thunders were, but he was not
He's not going to tell us. He's not going to tell us.
Okay?
No.
So be careful, folk, on this one. All right? If you think you've solved the seven thunders, you might know more than even John does. And that would be scary to me.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah.
All right? But what can we know about the seven thunders? And I would point out that in Psalm 29, you have seven thunders. And we won't take time to read that text right now, but you may well want to look it up for yourself afterward. Psalm 29 is actually a hymn that celebrates a thunderstorm coming up against the mountains of Lebanon. And this thunderstorm, as the thunder roars, the psalmist is hearing that roar as the voice of God. So the seven thunders are like seven voices of God. And in Revelation 2, sometimes God's voice is like thunder, you see. So in these seven thunders, the voices of God are speaking. People are experiencing the power of God. You tie that together with John chapter 12. In John chapter 12, Jesus is about to go to the cross. And as he's looking forward, not positively, but he's seeing that is coming, he seems almost depressed, a bit troubled. And at this time, God encourages him. A voice of thunder comes, and Jesus hears God giving him some encouragement. So thunders and the voice of God are tied together throughout Scripture. So there's one thing, at least, we can know about the seven thunders, that it has something to do with the voice of God. It is a message that perhaps God could tell us, but chooses not to. And it reminds me of John 16:12. Jesus, when he was speaking to his disciples, he said, I have many things to tell you, but you can't handle it now. It's not that God wants to withhold information from us, it's our capacity that's the issue. And I would appeal to our viewers with the simple fact that if you want to know more of the Word of God, what's crucial is to increase your capacity, because God can only tell you what you are willing and able to receive. You see? So there are things that we can do, and some of the strategies we've been talking about here, the way that you can go about studying the Bible, being faithful to God in what you choose to eat and drink, keeping your mind, your body as healthy as possible. These are all strategies one can do to increase the capacity. Jesus even says things like, if you are willing to do His will, you will know. So
it's more a heart attitude, isn't it?
If we're willing to practice what God teaches us, then He can teach us more. If you're not going to do what God says, why would He bother teaching you?
That's right.
You see? So I think one way to increase our capacity is to be willing to obey. And one vow that I made to Pamela a long time ago was that I'm not going to preach anything I'm not willing to live. if something hasn't changed my life, it's not worth my time.
Sure.
It's not worth sharing with other people.
Well said. Well said.
So in these 7 thunders, there's a lot of things we don't understand, but no point in speculating.
Oh, no.
Increase your capacity, but God has some of his secrets, and that's
Because
okay.
there are other things that are clear.
Yeah.
Sure.
Chapter 10, 5-7. That's the heart of this passage.
Okay.
Then the angel I had seen, standing on the sea and on the land, raised his right hand to heaven. And he swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created the heavens and all that is in them, the earth and all that is in it, the sea and all that is in it, and said, there will be no more delay. But in the days of the 7th angel, when he is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. So here again, like in chapter 5, you have a decisive moment, the outcry of this mighty angel, and he says that the mystery of God is about to be finished. He says, in the days of the 7th angel, this will occur. He also says, as this angel swearing an oath, saying, there will be no more delay. The Greek actually says, there'll be no more time. And this means chronological time. What could that be about? Actually, perhaps, do we have a picture of that angel? The angel of Revelation. There it is. Yes. He's standing on the sea and the land, raising his right hand to heaven, swearing, time will be no more. Daniel 12 has a very similar scene. If we could see that text. Daniel 12, verses 4-10. You, Daniel, close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Here's a scroll that's closed. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood 2 others, one on this bank of the river, one on the opposite bank. And one of them said to the man clothed in linen who is above the waters of the river, how long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled? The man clothed in linen who is above the waters of the river lifted his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, it will be for a time, times, and half a time. When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed. I want to compare Revelation 10 and Daniel 12 because this is as close as you're going to get to a quotation in the book of Revelation. Revelation 10, Daniel 12 is very close. Notice the angel is standing on the sea and the land, is a location. He raises his right hand to heaven, and he swears by him who lives forever and ever. Compare that with Daniel 12. The man clothed in linen is above the waters of the river, a location, lifts his right hand toward heaven, swears by him who lives forever. There's about 8 key words in common between Revelation 10 and Daniel 12, and it tells us this time no more. What is this time? It is the time prophecies of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, there are a number of time prophecies. They are 1,260 days. There are 1,290 days. There are 1,335 days. There are 2,300 days. This angel is saying, toward the end of the 7 trumpets, toward the end of Earth's history, the time prophecies of Daniel will reach an end. So you see, a person who understands the time prophecies of Daniel will recognize that there will come a time when they are ending. But will that be the end of the world? No, it won't. Because it says time will continue, and Daniel calls this final period the time of the end. It'll be continuing until the 7th angel blows his trumpet. So chapter 10 brings us to the last period of Earth's history, the last time of the proclamation of the gospel. When was that time? We don't have time to look at the history here, but many, many careful students of this text have drawn the conclusion that somewhere in the 1790s through the 1840s, that in this period, all the time prophecies of Daniel came to a conclusion. And if that is the case, Graham, you and I are living in this very last period of Earth's history.
And that ought to encourage us. It
Yes.
ought to encourage us
It ought to.
because,
That's
you know,
correct.
there's probably a good reason why Jesus said, go back and study Daniel, isn't there? And we're sort of taking Revelation now, and many folk who are watching this program probably have not a great knowledge of Daniel, And if they get a chance, they ought to take an opportunity to attend a Daniel seminar or become more familiar with Daniel, because as Jesus is speaking about the gospel going to the world, he talks about wicked powers working against the gospel, and he said, understand what Daniel had to say.
Yeah.
And there's a very good reason for that, because the book of Revelation for the second half is basically dealing with what Jesus said. So there's a tie-up with Daniel and Revelation here.
Yes.
Yeah, there certainly is.
So if you see some promotions connected with this program in relation to Daniel seminars, you may want to take advantage of those, because Daniel does provide a strong foundation for the study of Revelation. It does point us to a timeline, and let me show that timeline at this point. The timeline here, when you study carefully Daniel 10 and verses 6, you see the timeline here. You have Daniel's time prophecies. The angel of Revelation 10 proclaims the conclusion of Daniel's time prophecies, but there's another period until the seventh angel sounds his trumpet. In Daniel, that period is called the time of the end, and I believe that's the period in which we are now living.
What an exciting time to live. Sure it is, yeah. Okay, John, probably time we had a break.
All right.
I think it's time we had a break.
When we come back, we will finish
We'll carry on and revise, yeah.
Revelation 10.
Sure. Okay.
Good.
Welcome back. Well, John, I think we ought to do a little bit of revision just to hit the high points of the things that are quite clear. And
Okay.
let's just do a bit of revision, and we'll have this image up of what we've been reading here in Revelation. First of all, an angel comes down, and this is like a message from God. This is a book open. We're thinking the Lamb's sealed book now open, but there are also relationships to the book of Daniel as well, too. So John can have two things in mind at one time. We're well aware of that. This angel puts one foot on the earth, one on the sea, and says it's a worldwide proclamation, isn't it? This is going to go all over the world, and no more delay, this is a time when the winding up of everything, the ending of Daniel's time prophecies, the gospel's going to the world. So we think here of the gospel going, but bitter consequences too. And sweet in the mouth, but bitter in the belly. So this is the imagery coming here. So John, give us a bit of interpretation, a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I've mentioned previously that chapter 10 is divided into two parts. Chapters 1 through 7, John experiences this vision, but then in verses 8 to 10, it comes to him. In other words, he himself is addressed. Usually John is seeing stuff that's going on somewhere else, so to speak. But every so often the vision comes to him. And that's an important feature of biblical prophecy that we should talk about just for a moment. Because you see, quite often in Bible prophecy, you have a difference between vision and interpretation. Let me just briefly tell you a story. In Daniel 2, there's a prophecy. You might like to look it up after this program. Daniel 2 is an interesting one. You have King of Babylon, and the King of Babylon can't sleep one night, because God has given him a dream. And in that dream, he sees a gigantic statue with a series of medals. That statue takes the king all the way to the end of the world when he sees the kingdom of God established. So in that dream or in that vision, God speaking to the king, telling him about the future, carries him all the way into the future. But later on in the chapter, the prophet Daniel comes to explain the vision to the king. So you have a vision, but then you have an explanation or an interpretation. So the prophet comes to the king and he says to him, "You, O king, are the head of gold." So he's addressing the king right within his time and place. He's not coming from the end of time. He's right there where the king is. He says, "You're the head of gold. After you comes a second nation that's represented by the silver. After that comes a third nation represented by the brass. After that is a fourth nation represented by the iron." So he explains to the king from his point of time, from his perspective in life. In a vision, the prophet can go anywhere and any time. Prophet can be carried to some other country, can go to the other end of the world. Prophet can go to the end of the world. You see, in the vision, the prophet can go anywhere, anytime. But when an angel comes to explain a vision to the prophet, He's addressing that prophet in his time and place. This is very important, particularly when we come to Revelation 17, one of the most difficult and disputed texts in the book of Revelation. We will see that there's a vision and there's an interpretation. And where that interpretation fits is extremely important in understanding it correctly. Here in chapter 10, the vision comes first, but now we're coming to the part in verses 8 to 11 where the angel actually addresses John in his time and his place. And basically what he is saying here is that, well, let's take a look at it. That would be chapter 10, verses 8 to 11. We haven't looked at it yet, so let me read it to you. Then the voice that I had heard from heaven spoke to me once more. So now he's saying, well, he's addressing John directly. John gets engaged in this. Go, take the scroll that lies open in the hand of the angel who's standing on the sea and on the land. So I went to the angel and asked him to give me the little scroll. He said to me, take it and eat it. It'll turn your stomach sour, but in your mouth it will be as sweet as honey. So I took the little scroll from the angel's hand and ate it. This is John himself. He's definitely engaged in the vision, isn't he? It tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth, but when I had eaten it, my stomach turned sour. Then I was told, you must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, languages, and kings. So John gets a sweet book, but a sour stomach. And so this is actually based on the experience of Ezekiel, isn't it?
Sounds very much like Ezekiel.
Yeah.
Ezekiel was given a message to take and share with the people, wasn't he? Yeah, he was, yeah. And this experience that really Ezekiel has is very much mirrored in John. And Ezekiel has a vision of the glory of God. We find in chapter 5, John has a vision of the glory of God, the inauguration of heaven and in Christ and so forth. So there is a very close-up tie here, isn't there? There really is with this. And so there was a disappointment was to come. What's this bitter in this belly thing? What's this?
Well, the most immediate thing is verse 11. He says, you must prophesy again.
Right.
Now, why is that significant? I would not be surprised. I think it would be natural to expect that John might think this spectacular vision might be the thing that heralds the end of time. That maybe Jesus is about to come. He's been looking forward to Jesus coming all of his life. Now Jesus appears to him and he talks about the great events of the end. I would be surprised if John didn't think this is decisive. This is moving right to the end. And then the angel comes to him and says, sorry, actually, you must prophesy again. This book will continue to be heard for a long time yet to come.
Right. So Ezekiel, by eating the book, he's really saying he takes the message of that book and he shares it with Israel. But of course, Israel didn't want it. So that was a bit of a bitter experience
that was the bitter
for Ezekiel.
thing for him.
Okay. Can we see overtures in this with John? Perhaps acting the part of God's people who take the gospel to the world.
Well, I think that's definitely the case when you get to chapter 11. You see that worked out further.
Okay, the bitter consequences of sharing the gospel at the end of time. So, Ezekiel is almost like a pattern or a model that John is following for the end time people who proclaim God's message of the gospel to the world. Taking the good news, you absorb it yourself, you share it and wish that others would have the same joy you have, but there's bitterness that comes with this. There is. Sure. There's bitterness that comes to us. So there's a disappointment, John, that comes with this.
Well, I remember thinking about this text when I was in the monastery of St. John on Patmos.
Right.
And let's show our viewers what we were thinking about at that time. We are in the museum of the monastery of St. John, which is at the highest point of the island of Patmos. This monastery was built around 1150 AD in honor of the book of Revelation and in honor of the human author, John. We see here a beautiful representation of the book of Revelation. This is hand-beaten silver, the cover of this book, and it's filled with scenes from the book of Revelation. For example, over here, you can see John receiving the vision. In the middle of the top, are the 7 branch candlesticks. Over here you see the 3 flying angels, and you also see John eating the scroll. You see, John is told to eat the scroll in chapter 10. It's sweet in his mouth, but it's bitter in his stomach. Yet he is told, you must prophesy again to many peoples. You see, this is a prophecy that this book would live on way past John's day. This was no guarantee that this would be the case. In fact, the book of Revelation had considerable difficulty getting into the canon, particularly in the eastern part of the Mediterranean. It was no guarantee that Revelation would be in our Bibles. And yet, the prophecy came true. And today, there's more interest in the book of Revelation than ever before. In fact, a number of Hollywood movies have either taken the language of Revelation, things like Armageddon, or they have also built upon the themes and the story of Revelation. Movies like Terminator and like The Matrix. So today there is more interest in the book of Revelation and in the way that it approaches things than ever before.
Okay, it's certainly true. There's an interest in the book. And this, what happened with this disappointment that John is modeling here, taken from Ezekiel, is also a little bit of a foretaste of what happened at the end of Daniel's prophecies in the 19th century, isn't it?
Because the interest in the book of Revelation's really accelerated since the 19th century.
Sure, yeah. And there was a disappointment when people really did believe that Jesus was coming, and they had reasons why they thought this, and there was joy in their hearts, wasn't there? Sweetness. I mean, for any Christian to see and believe that Jesus is coming soon, of course you'd be joyous, wouldn't you? But of course it didn't happen, and there were bitter consequences. So we're going to hear Arthur Patrick, a colleague of mine at Avondale College, and he's studied this area well, and he's going to explain a little bit to us of this disappointment.
All right.
Like this 19th century organ, my specialty in Christian history is the 19th century. And I've been fascinated to study the various Christian groups, Baptists, Methodists, Congregationalists and others, whose passion for the second coming of Christ surfaced in the 1844 era. Of course, they faced a hostile world. Theirs was a great disappointment. But they had great dedication in searching the scriptures to seek to understand their experience and their duty.
You know, it's hard for us to appreciate the bitterness and the disappointment of those people. You know, they talk about having wept and wept and wept through the whole night.
So you had people there, many different denominational backgrounds, that all became convinced Daniel's prophecies were drawing to a close around the time of 1844.
A wide variety of people. It was often liked upon a great Advent movement involving many people of many races and denominations and backgrounds, and they were very excited because they believed that Jesus was coming in their day.
But it didn't happen.
But it didn't happen.
And how did they respond?
They responded by going back to the Bible and saying, all right, let's study the scripture and see, you know, they had such confidence that it had to be them, not the Bible. They opened their hearts, and I believe that God led them to seek out and find more truth.
Well, it's interesting that in Revelation 10 itself, when the angel holds up his hand and swears, he says, time will be no more. And in the context, it would be the time of Daniel's prophecies would be no more. So that sounds pretty much like the end of all things.
Well, you could expect a person would get excited.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you?
That's right.
Yeah.
But there's a word there, and the word is but.
But.
With one T. B-U-T.
Yeah.
But when the seventh angel sounds his trumpet, the mystery of God will be finished. And the mystery of God here is the gospel. So Daniel's time prophecies would come to an end, but the world doesn't.
Yeah.
That's the piece they missed.
But it's easy for us to be wise in hindsight, isn't it?
Of course.
Look back and say, oh, how could they be so terribly wrong? But
of course.
we would have probably been no different.
That's right. You see, so Revelation 10 brings us a powerful message about the end of time. There were others who recognized this, maybe got a few things mistaken, maybe became a bit confused about it, but their work is a foundation that others can learn upon.
Sure.
And it tells us in Revelation 10 that there will be a message that will go out to the world at the end of time. It'll be a unique message for that time. Among elements of that message would be Daniel, proclamation of the book of Daniel. And we've mentioned, we encourage people to learn more about the book of Daniel if they want to understand Revelation. They're almost like companion books, and that would be a great follow-up to a series of programs like this.
Sure.
But also, the message will include Revelation. Because you see, John is told you must prophesy again. And that unfolding of the messages of John would be particularly important in this final period of
now
Earth's
that
history.
scroll is open
Yeah.
to reveal the contents, and we're going to see the second half of Revelation is going to major in the gospel going to the world and a reaction against it and the bitter consequences that will come to those who proclaim that message.
So the third point that will occur at that time is the gospel will be proclaimed. So as we approach the end of time, God is saying you should look for a message, a coherent message that will include these 3 points: the gospel, a focus on Daniel, a focus on Revelation.
Yes.
It'll be the gospel, the time-honored gospel, the everlasting gospel, but it'll have a unique flavor in the final era.
And when you understand it, it will bring hope, meaning, and purpose to your life.
That's right.
It'll bring a joy. Sure, it will.
The combination of those.
The combination of those, yes. And, you know, really to bring this session to a close, I'd like to show an image which I think is very, very important as we think of this, John. And this image tells us a little bit about what God's people will experience at the end of time. Some people at this stage of history wonder, how could anyone oppose the gospel? But then you look, what happened to Jesus? He was betrayed by Judas, deserted by his disciples, apparently forsaken by God. If you're going to follow Jesus, they will probably treat you like they treated Jesus. Look at Jesus. He's the model. It may cost you to follow him, but that's what we're called to do, be followers of Jesus.
So if you're following Jesus and you get yourself into some trouble and so forth, don't be disturbed by it.
No.
You're just following the footsteps of the Master.
And great is your reward in heaven. Okay, it's time you had a break.
All right.
Good on you, John.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Just before we have our interview with Pamela, John has a special burden of something he wants to share with us. He's just asked me, Graham, how much do you know about the Seven Thunders? And I had to admit, John, I don't know much. I want to know. I'm desperately interested. I'm almost angry with John for writing it down and teasing me, but I really don't know.
Well, it's probably a good thing that you don't know much, and I think we can find a reason for that in Deuteronomy 29:29.
You're going to encourage me.
I think so.
That's what I need.
It's a good one. Take a look at this text. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may follow all the words of this law. Please keep that on the screen for just a sec, because it says the secret things belong to God, but what does He reveal to us? The things that we need to follow. So there are things that God knows that aren't that important for us to know.
But we want to know.
We may want to know. We may be curious. I remember a little girl, who was very, very curious, and her mother got a little tired of it after a while, and she said, "Girl, don't you know that curiosity killed the cat?" Little girl thought about that for a minute, and then she said, "Mommy, what did the cat want to know?" So the curiosity doesn't stop, and we can be that way. We can be very curious. People have sometimes used the term scholar for Graham and myself. And what is a scholar? And so, scholars must be people who know a lot of stuff. Do you know what a scholar really is? A scholar is somebody who knows how much he or she doesn't know. You see, when you do a dissertation, when you write a dissertation, mine was 425 pages. When you write a dissertation, you're like a farmer in a vast field digging a post hole. And you dig down maybe a meter into the ground to lay a really solid post. A scholar doing a dissertation is like digging that post hole. And you know everything there is to know about the post hole. But you realize the deeper you go, what do you realize? You can go that deep in the entire field. So the deeper you go, the more you realize, whoa, that field is deep. There's a lot of stuff I don't know. When you only knew the surface of the field, you could feel like, oh, I know a lot. I know about everything there is to know about this field. But the deeper you go, the more you realize you don't know. A true scholar is someone who realizes how much he or she doesn't know. So when you get into scholarship, people sometimes are tempted to praise you for the knowledge that you have. And one thing that's helped me through the years is what I call the ladder of humility. And let me share that with you briefly. I owe this to some degree to a former teacher, Fritz Guy, who shared it perhaps in a slightly different form. But people who look up to Graham and myself, they might say, boy, these guys know a lot. All right, so let's make that step one on the ladder of humility. John Pauline knows a few things, okay? But compare that with step two. Step two on the ladder of humility is what everybody on earth knows. Now, is that a small jump or a really, really huge jump?
Huge.
What would you say, Graham?
Huge.
It's a huge, almost infinite. You walk into any library and you see hundreds of thousands, millions of books. You say, how much of that do I know? Very, very little. So human knowledge is vast, but that's not where it stops. Step three on the ladder of humility is how much everybody on earth could know given an infinite amount of time and opportunity. Is that a little leap? Or is that once again an almost infinite jump? But take it a step further. Step four in the ladder of humility is what everyone in the universe knows. Now, how big a leap is that? Because all that we really know, except for the Bible and a few other hints that we have, about all we know outside of this earth, is very, very limited. Can you imagine the vast knowledge that there is out there? Everything we could possibly know on this earth barely scratches the surface of knowledge. So that's step four on the ladder of humility. You know what step five is?
I think I do, and it's scary. Yeah, go on.
It's what God
it's very
knows.
Humbling, yes.
It's what God knows, you see. And what God knows is infinitely greater than what everyone else in the universe knows. When I realize that I am at the bottom of this ladder, step one to step five, it humbles me. It helps me to realize that all the learning, 30 years of study of Revelation, I hope that this is a great blessing to our viewers. I hope that it's a great blessing to many people, but it's only scratching the surface. If we don't stay humble, if we don't realize there are things we don't know, things we never will know, things that God has held to Himself.
Yeah.
That's the ladder of humility for me. And I think one of the greatest joys you can have is growing and learning, and at the same time being honest and true to yourself, realizing how much you know, but also even more how little you know.
It can be a thrilling journey.
That's right.
A thrilling journey.
And when we return from the break, I suspect Pamela may help us to know just how much we don't know.
It'll be interesting.
Welcome back. We're here with Pamela, and she was so focused on the questions she wanted to write them down this time and make sure that they were worded just right. So what did you have for us?
Okay. Question I have for you is, what does it mean that the gospel is sweet? I mean, in a practical sense.
Not just platitudes.
Yeah.
I want to get really
get
down
real.
to earth, practical, get real. Okay. I think among other things, as we've mentioned before, a little bit of a foretaste of heaven, the love, the joy, the peace can be that foretaste. I think a sense of security. You know where you stand with God. It doesn't really matter what other people think if the really, really most important person thinks well of you. There's a confidence, there's a security that comes in there. I think also the sense of value. When the most valuable person in the universe thinks highly of you, that puts a real value upon yourself. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Okay. Why is following God such a bitter experience sometimes?
Oh, I see. You're coming off the sweet and the bitter,
sweet and
like
bitter.
it was. Well, what would be bitter about the gospel? I think one of the things is the gospel is a threat to power and position of other people. You can't control a person that has the gospel, and so there tends to be some opposition. Was there ever a time in your life when knowing the gospel was somewhat of a bitter experience?
Well, I can think back when I was a teenager, and I decided to give my life to God. Changes happened. Changes in my lifestyle, my music, the way I ate and drank, just the way I lived my life. Then my friends, just weren't comfortable with me anymore. And that didn't make me feel very good.
So the bitterness came in the way the people you had related to before related to you now. Yeah. Well, the New Testament, the book of Revelation doesn't get into this, but the New Testament has a theme of the two ages. It's the idea that we live in an old age in which there's trouble and sorrow and difficulty. There's the new age, the life of heaven kind of is seeping in, and we can get a taste of that. But what that actually means in practice, you said practical, down-to-earth terms. What it means in down-to-earth terms is that when you accept Jesus, some people say you'll be wealthy, everything will go great. Yet when you accept Jesus, it actually introduces a bit of conflict into one's own life, because the two ages now are warring inside of us. That's why the Battle of Armageddon, in a sense, is an inner battle that comes into play. So what you experience is what many experience when you receive the gospel. You think everything's going to be better, and then maybe sometimes things even get a little bit worse. When you hang on to God, things come through okay.
Well, I guess what John has said to Pamela is very, very important. There is an inner battle going on. And John, I feel as though I'm spending all my life learning. And I've learned so much as I've been preparing for this project too. And I feel as though I'm on a journey, and I'm learning and I'm growing, and some things are becoming clearer, and yet I realize there's more to come. There are some people who don't even want to start that journey. There are some people who are way ahead of me. There are some people who are slow. But we've got to be kind and gracious to each other as we make this journey. And I want to encourage those who are watching this telecast to make that journey, to learn, to grow. And as you learn and grow, as Revelation says, this is a book revealing Jesus. You're going to learn more and more about Him and how He loves us and cares for us, how He gives us hope, meaning, and purpose. So let me encourage you to begin that journey. Never be afraid of what you're going to learn. And as you learn it, He also asks you to live it. So let me challenge you not to be afraid of truth. Now, thank you for watching this telecast. We're going to bring it to an end in a moment, but remember, our next telecast is going to follow on from this one. Last time we were dealing with the bitterness, and we're going to see what this bitter consequences will be to those who proclaim the gospel at the end of time. And this is a fascinating study. There ought not to be a chapter division, but there is, and many folk have missed it. So we'll look forward to meeting with you next time.
If you've enjoyed this presentation on the Book of Revelation and would like more information, visit www.revelation.hope.com. You can purchase your own DVD set of this series or the booklets, which cover the content of each program.